Remember trying to buy your first, like, adult video game?
Oh, yeah.
That cashier side-eye when you pull out your ID all shaky?
Right.
Yeah, that's a rite of passage. But online, age verification, that's a whole other can of worms.
It is a whole different ball game, isn't it?
Yeah.
And honestly, it's something that's becoming a really big deal in Europe right now.
Yeah, I've been seeing it everywhere.
The EU is really pushing for stricter rules online,
Hmm.
especially when it comes to protecting kids, especially on social media. Like, that's their big focus.
Which, you know me, I love a good deep dive.
Of course.
So that's what we're doing today, age verification online. And we've got two really interesting sources for this. We've got a new report from EDR, they're a European digital rights group.
Yeah.
And then we've got this article from Tweakers, which if you don't know is like the big tech site in the Netherlands.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is both of those sources actually mention these two really important pieces of EU law that are kind of driving this whole thing.
Yep.
The DSA, the Digital Services Act, and then the IDS regulation.
Catchy.
Yeah, exactly. But basically, they're really putting the pressure on,
Okay.
especially social media companies,
Right.
to make things safer for younger users.
Which on the surface totally makes sense, like safer online spaces for kids, who's going to argue with that? But how do you actually do that? Verify everyone's age online?
Right.
It's the Wild West out there.
Exactly. It's tricky, to say the least. And the EDRI report actually breaks down like the main approaches
Okay.
that people are talking about. And spoiler alert, they've all got their issues.
Lay it on me.
All right. Well, the most basic one, just asking users to declare their age.
Oh, come on.
Simple, right?
That's like asking a vampire to guard the blood bank.
Pretty much.
I mean, I'm pretty sure I convinced an arcade owner I was old enough to play Time Crisis when I was like 10 years old.
Yeah, exactly. And that's basically what both EDRE and the Tweakers article are saying, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's so easy to get around. So, okay, what's the next step? Well, it's more secure methods. Think document-based verification.
Okay.
But that opens up a whole other can of worms.
Because then you're asking everyone to upload their passport just to, like, look at a meme? That's intense.
Yeah, and not only is it, potentially a bit much, but there are huge privacy concerns there.
Right. Major privacy nightmare.
Exactly. And what EDRE points out, which I think is really important here, is it's not going to affect everyone equally.
Right.
Not everyone has a government-issued ID.
That's true.
Think about younger people, people from marginalized communities, refugees.
Yeah.
They might not have those documents, so then they're automatically excluded.
It's like that digital divide thing, but with age as the dividing line.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so self-declaration is about as reliable as a chocolate teapot. And document checks are, like, ethically kind of a minefield, so what's left?
This is where it gets even more interesting and maybe a little creepy for some people. Age estimation technology.
Okay, hold on. Now we're in Black Mirror territory. Is this where an algorithm analyzes, like, my every move online to decide if I'm old enough to, like, look at a cat meme?
Not quite that dystopian yet.
Okay.
But age estimation, it does use things like facial recognition, voice analysis. They even look at your browsing history
Oh, no!
to try and guess how old you are.
And how accurate is this whole guessing game? I'm just, like, picturing a friend of mine who maybe looked at one too many retirement planning articles.
Right. Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what EDI found is that the accuracy is still a huge problem.
Really?
There have actually been studies, and they found that these systems get it wrong all the time. And they often have biases. For example, they often misjudge women. And there have been issues with people with Down syndrome being incorrectly estimated, too.
So wait, so not only is it potentially very invasive, but it could actually be, like, inherently biased.
That's the worry.
That's not great.
And it's a huge part of the debate, right? Because if we're talking about restricting what people can access, the opportunities they have based on a system that's flawed,
Yeah.
that raises some serious ethical questions.
Yeah. So we've got self-declarations that, let's be real, anyone can get around. Then there's the document checks, which are a whole privacy minefield. And then we top it off with AI that's trying to guess our age and might just be accidentally ageist.
Yeah.
It's like we're trying to pick a lock with a wet noodle here. Are we even going to make a dent with these methods?
And the thing is, this isn't just about, like, the tech, right? We're talking about shaping how a whole generation interacts with the online world, like what they see, what they can access.
Totally. It's a big deal. And actually, the Tweakers article, they quote some experts who are calling for a more holistic approach instead of getting so hung up on just age.
Which is interesting because EDI talks about this too.
Okay.
And they basically say that fixating on age verification could actually do more harm than good.
Okay. But devil's advocate for a sec.
Yeah.
I get it, online safety is super important, especially for younger kids. But we have age restrictions in the real world, too. Like, you can't just stroll into a bar and order a drink if you're 16.
True.
So is it really so crazy to have some age-gated online spaces?
It's a fair point, but the thing is, the internet isn't exactly the same as the offline world.
Right.
And that's where that whole idea of digital resilience comes in.
Okay.
Because what EDRI is saying is that if we try to protect kids from every single risk online,
Yeah.
we're not actually teaching them how to deal with those risks when they're older.
So it's like trying to teach someone to swim, but keeping them in the kiddie pool forever? Like, sure, they feel safe, but...
They'll never learn to swim in the deep end. And the internet is like the ocean, right? It's huge. It's constantly changing. And age isn't always a good way to tell who's ready for what.
Okay, that makes sense. So if age restrictions on their own aren't the answer, then what do we do? How do we protect young people but not leave them totally unprepared for the online world either?
That is the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think what EDRI is suggesting is we need to stop thinking about age as this like one-size-fits-all thing.
Oh, okay.
And we need to look for solutions that take into account that the internet is complex, kids are different, and everyone has different needs.
Okay, so if we're ditching this whole age as a digital bouncer thing, what's the alternative? EDRA keeps mentioning these more nuanced solutions, but what do those actually look like in practice?
Well, it's not about finding like one magic solution, is it? It's more about using a bunch of different things together
Okay.
to make a safer, better experience for younger users.
Got it. So like a multi-layered approach, what's the first layer look like?
So EDI talks a lot about this idea of combining self-declaration, which we talked about.
Right, which has its issues.
Exactly. But combining that with other things, like think of it as a safety net instead of just a gate.
So you're still asking for age, but you're not just relying on that.
Right. You're trying to make it safer overall.
Got it.
So one of the things that they mentioned that's really interesting is this idea of safety and privacy by design.
Okay. Which sounds very idealistic, but what does that actually mean?
So it's basically building platforms with those things in mind right from the start. So you have really strong privacy settings that are easy for a younger person to understand and use.
Okay.
Defaults that are set to be more cautious and give people, especially younger people, more control over their experience online.
So instead of just slapping a warning label on something, it's more about making the whole thing safer from the ground up.
Yeah, it's about being more mindful of how it affects people, especially younger users.
Yeah.
And it's not just about the tech itself, right? EDUI also talks about how we can use content labeling better.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, we're used to seeing those age ratings on movies and games, but what if those were more detailed,
Okay.
more consistent, and actually took into account like different age groups, their sensitivities?
Right, but I can already see people arguing about what actually counts as appropriate.
Right.
It's subjective.
It's tough, isn't it? And that's why it's not perfect on its own, right?
Right.
It needs clear rules, and it needs people to be talking about it all the time. But it can definitely be a useful tool, especially if you're using it with these other things.
Okay, so we've got the safety by design. We've got the better content labeling. What else is in the mix?
Well, this one I think is really cool. They talk about creating online spaces that are just for kids.
Okay.
Like we kind of already see that a bit, right?
Yeah.
YouTube Kids is a good example.
Yeah.
But what if we did that for other things, like social media or even games?
So it's less about trying to make the whole internet safe for 7-year-olds and more about saying, hey, there's this whole section over here that we've designed specifically for you.
Exactly. And it's not about like creating some kind of baby internet.
Right.
It's just acknowledging that different spaces have different purposes and different audiences.
It's like having different sections in a library, right?
Yeah.
Like the kids section is going to look different from the adult section, and that's okay.
Exactly. It just makes sense. And it means kids can explore their interests safely and in a way that works for them.
It does sound promising, but let's be real. Getting everyone on board with all of this, the tech companies, the people making the laws, the digital rights groups, it feels like a lot.
It's a huge challenge.
Yeah.
And, people are going to disagree. There are going to be bumps in the road. We're going to have to keep talking about it. But the important thing is that we are talking about it.
Yeah.
We're questioning how things work, and we're trying to find ways to keep young people safe without taking away their rights or holding them back.
Mm-hmm.
Because ultimately, the internet isn't going anywhere.
It's not, and neither are those questions about online safety. especially when it comes to younger generations. I think, if anything, this whole deep dive has shown that finding the right approach is going to be a constant work in progress.
100%.
Right.
We need to be flexible, we need to keep learning, and we need to be okay with challenging the way things are. Because the internet's always changing, and the way we use it needs to change too.
And on that note, we'll leave you with a little something to think about. What if age isn't the only thing that matters when it comes to online safety? Like, what if we started thinking about digital literacy as its own form of ID?
Interesting.
Because some young people are way more digitally savvy than some adults, right? So could that be a better, fairer way to approach online safety for everyone?
Now that is a question, and I have a feeling it's one we're going to be asking ourselves for a long time.
As always, thanks for taking this deep dive with us. We'll catch you next time.